Hey everyone, and welcome back to Katsuyama Japan. Last episode we finished building habitats for the Ostroraptor and the Guanlong and a few other small carnivores in our park. Today we're shifting our focus to one of the most recognizable carnivores from South America. We're almost done putting this park back together, so let's get started putting back the Carnotaurus in Jurassic World Evolution 3. So the way we're bringing guests this way is going to be with the hotel. Because I'm still figuring things out and making assumptions based on Evolution 2, I was looking forward to seeing the view from this building similar to how we can use views from modular viewing galleries, but unfortunately that's not something we can see in Evolution 3. I was actually so convinced that we could still use these views from hotels that I went through and tested all the hotels myself, and unfortunately, we have no views we can see for these for ourselves. Still, it does give the visibility we need to incentivize our guests to come over here without the viewing gallery, which is kind of the most important part. The new updated lights are giving us the ability to make better interiors, so we'll have a small viewing platform on the back of this hotel, as well as the covered entrance to the hotel in the front. Because we don't have very many glass panel pieces, we're going to be using the same roof piece we've used previously, and we'll take this around the floor or the bottom part of this, and then we'll just flip one of the smaller ones on their sides on the top of it to be that top part of that glass roof. We don't need to add a ton of different props to the sides of this here, as this is just going to be a space similar to a smaller viewing gallery in the back of our building here. The front of the building needs to have a clear walkway to the door, so we'll decorate the sides with planter boxes and a few other things to try to bring this building to life. I find that once we start adding in the plants and other small items, it's easier to see the building come together. My hope is that this building is more of a dinosaur museum than an actual hotel. The hotels are at the entrance of the park, and I don't want guests to spend their nights directly next to a large carnivore, even if it is as iconic and really cool as the Carnotaurus. I did originally plan to have a lot more tables in this space here to try to fill it in with more people, but when we do have the Carnotaurus statue, I did choose to go back and add that statue in there, and then instead we'll have what maybe looks like a temporary wall in the middle here to create a barrier between the guests and that statue there. Similar, like I said, we are going to use a lot of these glass panels, and well, originally I did think that I was going to be using just the white panel paint on the sides of this here. I eventually decided that I would change it up a little bit and use wooden beams around the panels, and I think that was a really nice added touch. The building ended up being much more wood and panels than I originally thought, and I don't hate that, but more just a note on how rarely I start one of these with a firm plan on what it will look like in the end. This is the part that I really enjoy about modular building and creating something different for each one of these buildings. That was especially true of the roof, which I had originally started to build in just a very boring and plain roof, which is totally fine, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I decided to open up the roof and look into the building. This space up here, which will be more of an area for probably more staff to be in here. This doesn't have a lot of amenities and things that I think guests would really entertain, but it is going to be a space full of electrical panels and small pieces that would keep the lights on or anything else in this building functioning and working. I don't use a lot of glass roofs like this, but I felt like it was a nice thing to be able to look in a little bit more to this building and give it a little more dimension than it maybe would have traditionally had if I had just made this a very plain and boring roof. But again, there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of roofs that I will do end up not having a lot extra to them, but this one I felt like I would do this and also open a little bit of it with some of that glass. We are extending the building itself with a large observation deck that overlooks the enclosure. From a guest perspective, this would be the main place to stop. You're elevated just enough to get that view of the animal below, and if a Carnotaurus decided to walk past, which it will, that's the idea of the enclosure, you've got a front row seat to that. The deck needs to go across the entire back of the building, and we'll have paths on both sides that the guests can use to get to it. But again, this is going to be the main purpose of this area, is to be able to use this deck. The building and what's right here, again, it's supposed to be more like a museum-esque building space. It's really to get people over here, and so we'll fill this in with some different tables and a few things to try to give it the appearance of actually having guests over here. So we're going to start shaping the habitat a little bit, and I think this is a good opportunity to start talking about Carnotaurus. Carnotaurus literally means meat-eating bull, and it's easy to see why in the sense that it has those two horns over its eyes that make it one of the most recognizable carnivores ever discovered. It lived in Argentina, South America, about 71 million years ago during the late Cretaceous period. It also sits a little odd in its habitat, and that's not related to anything, it's just a side note that I felt was important to add here. It is one of the more interesting sitting animations, and I'm not quite sure why it has that, but it is entertaining every now and again to see this dinosaur in this interesting position in its enclosure here. When we start playing around with the terrain and the environment here in the enclosure for Carnotaurus, I think it's important to highlight that Carnotaurus is from South America, and it evolved as more of a fast, agile hunter, contrary to maybe a lot of the giant tyrannosaurs that we're used to in North America, like the Tyrannosaurus. So that actually influences a lot of the environment here. Instead of packing this with dense forest, we're leaving plenty of open space and a little bit of water here that's going to be actually incorporated into the top level here, which we're going to have for some different animals on the top of this. Carnotaurus, we want to make sure we have plenty of open running space for the animal here, and we're going to blend that with some of the wetland space and then as well as some of the arid area over here as well. But again, we're not going to use a lot of trees or anything here because we want to give the Carnotaurus plenty of room to be running and using that speed that it would to hunt down. We don't have other dinosaurs in here, but we're going to hunt down some goats in the area of here for them, and then also for the juveniles that we'll have in this space as well. Like I said, we are going to have some other animals on the top of this enclosure here, so we're going to split this into two. I know you thought you were getting one enclosure and you're getting two now, but we're going to use the dam in the game to build a barrier and a way to cleanly increase the elevation from one habitat to the next. And then we'll also play a little bit with this middle space here to create a little a chain barrier for that waterfall here. Technically, I guess an animal could like fall down this space here, and so we're going to make this a little bit more secure so that some of these other animals on the top here aren't going to be able to go down below. But also I want to have a small space here that when you're going from, again, the viewing deck that we have for the Carnotaurus, you can see some of these that you'll see in the background of it. We're going to go back and forth a few times here because I never build linearly. But for the Carnotaurus, the space is going to be pretty open, which means we don't have a lot of actual shade for the animal, which means we're going to create these large shelters here. I'm building a few covered areas so the animal has a place to escape the direct sun whenever they want. Even though this is Jurassic World Evolution 3 and it's a game, I still think it adds an element of realism to these parks. Now, would a real Carnotaurus have needed a giant man-made shelter? Obviously not. It lives in the real world, or it did, and so it would figure its own animal needs out, which is why also we're going to end up bringing the Carnotaurus into the space to test it out. But before we do that, we did have some baby osteoraptors that showed up and that we're going to be able to see entering in their enclosure again that we built last week here for them. It's really cool to see them. I also hadn't really watched a lot of the animations for Osteoraptor, so seeing this one where one of the juvenile Osteoraptors jumps over another one, I thought was really fun. And I realized I don't spend a lot of time looking at the juveniles. I actually don't spend a lot of time looking at the animals generally, as I'm usually more focused on building the space and then looking at it afterwards. But it was a nice fun thing to actually look in and see the Osteoraptors and the juveniles specifically enjoying their space before we brought back the Carnotaurus into here, which we needed again to really see how much space we have to play with and to roam with here and make sure we're meeting all of the environment needs of the animal. We're going to ignore the fact that we had two Carnotaurus that were walking through each other. The animations aren't perfect, but we're going to move right on through it to make sure we have everything we need. So we need to have a goat feeder. We need to have some meat for the juveniles, but also our male or adult Carnotaurus also use that quite a bit as well. And then I wasn't fully sure what the nest was going to look like, so I ended up just putting a nest in here temporarily before we start playing with the environment needs on the top here. Now, I didn't talk a lot about this right now. It wasn't something that we wanted to highlight too much because also our guests aren't going to be using these to actually see this animal, but it is going to be added to our park. And that's going to be some of the hybrids here. So I haven't done a lot with Ankylodocus and also the Stegoceratops. The Stegoceratops is in the Azores. The Ankylodocus was in Hawaii, and so we're going to move both of them over to the top of this space here with the hope that their environment needs are all met. They can't actually reproduce, so these are just going to end up staying here. But I'd like to feel like every now and again you can see them again from that viewing deck, but it's not a highlight here. In this park here, where we're focused on carnivores, we've also got some hybrids that we'll be playing with in the background. It just felt like a extra thing, a hidden secret in our Jurassic World Japan, which again, I still don't have a name for the park. Still working through that, hope to have that sometime soon here, but felt like a fun little addition to our area. So those will be in the background here. And then we're just going to play a lot with the front space here of the Carnotaurus enclosure. We've got plenty of space. We can play with a few of the different spaces here and adding some of the rock here. We'll add a little bit of trees and then making sure that we can cover up all of our other amenities for the animal, meaning like the food, the goat feeders. I want to make sure those are more hidden and the guests don't actually see those here. In the front of this, we're just going to play with a couple small different planter boxes here and decorating those on the sides of this. I feel like that's going to help complete this area here and make this feel like it's a little bit more closed off space for us, for our guests to see these. They'll walk over here. It's off to the side of this path there. That path will continue our loop that we're going to work on. We still need to add Uteranus and then Kyanzosaurus to our park. So those will be things that we'll be adding in very shortly here. But just finding a couple of these different planter boxes, again, is really important for me to give this a full feeling on this side of the park here. So we'll use this here, and then again, we're going to end up using that Carnotaurus statue. Again, we've used this twice here. I actually like this one here. You can see it from the enclosure with the Carnotaurus. We'll be able to see that a few times as we wrap this up here. And then also, we haven't added any kind of purple element to this space, and we've done that with all of our enclosures here. It's one of the small details that I feel like brings a park like this to life, including continuing to get a little bit better with things like adding shade for people to our park, which I haven't done a lot before. So we're going to create a more permanent structure here that's going to be shaded for our guests. I was originally planning to do something that felt a little more temporary, but then with the way that this came together, it felt like a little more of an established building. I am looking to build some more tent-like shaded areas that can be felt like they're just kind of propped up in areas for a park. Maybe that'll be something that we do in the future, but at least for today, this is just going to wrap up everything here. We'll make this space for our guests to be able to walk through. We'll have some tables under it, and then we'll add this a few times in a couple different spaces in our park as we feel like it's appropriate. We're wrapping up everything here. I do have some baby Carnotaurus that are about ready to come out of the nest, so I will leave you with that. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you on the next build.